Before the final bell of noon had finished echoing through Blackthorn Castle, Duchess Elara Vale had already lost her marriage, her title, and the only home anyone believed she had. The order came without ceremony. By sunset, she was to leave. Servants froze in the corridors as her trunks were carried from the private wing. Noble guests lingered near the marble staircase, pretending not to stare. At the center of it all stood Duke Alistair Blackthorn, immaculate, and certain he had finally rid himself of the quiet wife his court had always considered beneath him. Elara did not plead. She did not collapse. She did not even ask where she was expected to go. That unsettled him more than tears would have. For 3 years, she had moved through his castle like a shadow, speaking softly, dressing simply, never boasting of family or fortune. To the household, she was the woman fortunate enough to have married above her station. Now, with a single command, even that fragile place had been taken from her. Yet as Elara removed her wedding ring, something slipped from beneath her sleeve. A small gold seal, old, heavy, engraved with a crowned falcon. The Duke noticed it for only a second before she closed her hand around it. He did not recognize the crest, but the steward across the hall did. His face drained of color. Elara walked toward the doors without looking back, carrying nothing but a cloak and one sealed letter. Behind her, whispers spread through the castle. Some laughed. Others wondered how long a discarded duchess would survive beyond the estate walls. Only the steward remained silent, because he knew that crest had not been seen at Blackthorn in 20 years, and while the Duke believed he had just sent a powerless woman into the cold, 12 royal carriages were already racing toward his gates. 3 years earlier, Elara had entered Blackthorn Castle through the same iron gates she was now being forced to leave. The marriage had never begun with love. Alistair's father, the old Duke of Blackthorn, had arranged it during the final months of his life. He had introduced Elara only as the orphaned daughter of an old friend, a young woman of good breeding but little consequence. Alistair had been 29, proud, ambitious, and furious that his future had been decided for him. He married her because duty demanded it, then spent the next 3 years treating the marriage like a contract he intended to endure rather than a life he intended to share. Elara made that easy for him. She never competed for attention at court. She never demanded jewels, banquets, or a larger allowance. When noblewomen laughed at her simple gowns, she smiled and changed the subject. When Alistair forgot their anniversary, she told the servants not to remind him. And when whispers began that Blackthorn's quiet duchess lacked the charm, beauty, and influence expected of a great lord's wife, she answered none of them. Her silence was mistaken for weakness. No one knew how much of Blackthorn she had quietly held together. During the brutal winter of their first year, when tenant families were running out of grain, Elara sold a pair of pearl earrings and ordered food distributed anonymously. When fever swept through the eastern villages, she spent nights organizing medicines while Alistair negotiated military contracts in the capital. When one of the estate's oldest creditors threatened foreclosure, a mysterious payment arrived before dawn. Alistair believed his steward had found the money. The steward knew otherwise. Elara had asked him never to tell. She had wanted her husband's respect, not his gratitude bought by obligation. But patience had cost her dearly. The court called her dull. Alistair's mother called her unsuitable. And lately, Lady Seraphine Marrow, the beautiful daughter of a powerful marquess, had begun appearing at Blackthorn with increasing frequency. That morning, Seraphine's sapphire brooch vanished. By breakfast, it had been found inside Elara's writing desk. The accusation spread before Elara was even summoned. She denied nothing loudly enough to satisfy the room. She merely asked Alistair to look at her and decide whether, after 3 years, he truly believed she was a thief. He never investigated. To Alistair, the evidence seemed convenient and complete. To Elara, his refusal to question it hurt more than the accusation itself, because it proved that all her quiet devotion had purchased no faith. With Seraphine weeping beside him and half the household watching, the Duke chose pride over trust. By noon, Elara was ordered out, and not one person in that grand hall knew she had just sacrificed the last reason she had ever had to stay. By early afternoon, Blackthorn Castle had already begun erasing Elara. Her gowns were removed from the Duchess's wardrobe and folded into travelling trunks. The servants who had once bowed to her now avoided her eyes, uncertain whether kindness toward a disgraced woman might be remembered against them. Even the flowers in her sitting room were cleared away, as though 3 years of her life could be packed before sunset and carried beyond the gates. The Dowager Duchess made certain the humiliation was complete. She descended the staircase, dressed in mourning black silk, though no one had died, and announced before the household that Blackthorn could no longer shelter a woman accused of theft. Then, with Seraphine standing quietly at her side, she instructed the steward to remove Elara's name from the family chapel register until the Duke decided how quickly an annulment could be obtained. That was when the whispers changed. This was no longer temporary exile. Alistair intended to end the marriage, and Seraphine's presence made everyone understand what might come next. Elara heard servants speculating that Blackthorn would soon have a new duchess, one with powerful relatives, fashionable manners, and the connections needed to secure the family's future. Others whispered about the heir Alistair still did not have after 3 years of marriage. No one asked whether the fault was hers. No one needed to. Cruelty required very little evidence once a room had chosen its victim. Elara remained composed until a maid carried out a small cedar box from beneath her bed. She moved then, not quickly, but with enough urgency to make the steward notice. Inside the box were no jewels from Blackthorn, no stolen treasures, and nothing Seraphine could claim. There was only a folded strip of blue velvet, a heavy signet ring bearing the same crowned falcon as the seal beneath Elara's sleeve, and a letter closed with dark red wax. Across the front, written in a firm hand, were 6 words: "For Lady Elara Vale, by royal command." The maid stared. The steward went pale again, but before anyone could read more, Elara took the letter and returned it to the box. The Dowager Duchess dismissed it as an old family relic. Seraphine laughed softly, suggesting that desperate women often surrounded themselves with impressive-looking trinkets. Alistair said nothing, yet his eyes lingered on the wax seal. He had seen that mark somewhere before, not in Blackthorn, in the royal palace, and for the first time since ordering his wife away, uncertainty entered his face. Outside, far beyond the castle walls, the first sound of carriage wheels began rolling across the northern road. Nobody inside the castle noticed them yet. They were still too busy deciding what Elara had lost to wonder why royal horses were approaching Blackthorn at such speed that afternoon. The final humiliation came just before sunset. Alistair summoned the household to the great hall, where the last of Elara's trunks already waited beside the doors. Nobles who had stayed for the afternoon gathered beneath the chandeliers, drawn by the promise of scandal. Seraphine stood near the Duke in pale blue silk, composed enough to appear innocent, while the Dowager Duchess watched from the dais with the satisfaction of someone seeing an old inconvenience finally removed. Elara entered alone. She wore no jewels from Blackthorn, no family colors, no sign of rank beyond the quiet grace with which she crossed the marble floor. Alistair did not ask her to defend herself again. Before everyone present, he announced that until an annulment could be granted, Elara would no longer be recognized publicly as Duchess of Blackthorn. Her household allowance was suspended. Her private rooms would be sealed. She would leave the estate immediately and remain away until the matter of the stolen brooch was settled before the court. Then came the cruelest blow. He declared that Lady Seraphine would remain at Blackthorn as his mother's guest and would assist with the duties Elara had supposedly failed to fulfill. A murmur moved through the hall. Everyone understood what that meant. Elara had not merely been accused. She had already been replaced. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not fear, not jealousy, hurt. It lasted only a second. Then she removed the Blackthorn signet from her finger and placed it on the long table between them. No begging followed, no accusation. She simply looked at the man she had protected for 3 years and accepted the truth he had finally made impossible to ignore. He had never trusted the woman beside him enough to ask whether the evidence made sense. Alistair mistook her silence for defeat. He ordered 2 guards to escort her beyond the gates before nightfall. Elara turned toward them willingly. That was when Seraphine smiled. She asked, lightly enough for the nearest nobles to hear, whether someone should arrange a village room for the former duchess, since a woman with no family and no fortune might find the roads unkind after dark. A few people laughed. Elara stopped. Then, without turning, she said she would not need one. The certainty in her voice silenced the room. Before anyone could ask why, the great doors burst open. A young footman stumbled inside, breathless and white-faced. He tried to speak, failed, then looked directly at the Duke. Something enormous was happening outside. 12 carriages had entered the Blackthorn Road, and every one of them carried the royal crest. Ahead of them rode mounted guards in silver ceremonial armor, carrying crimson standards that belonged to no duke, marquess, or provincial lord, but to the royal crown itself alone. For several seconds, no one in the great hall moved. Then the sound reached them. Hooves, dozens of them. The thunder rolled through the courtyard until even the crystal chandeliers seemed to tremble. Alistair turned toward the open doors just as the first carriage swept beneath the archway. It was black lacquered wood, trimmed in gold, drawn by 4 white horses and guarded by riders in silver armor. A second carriage followed, then a third, then a fourth. By the time the 6th appeared, servants had crowded the windows. Noble guests abandoned all pretense of dignity and hurried toward the steps. The Dowager Duchess stared in disbelief as more carriages filled the courtyard until 12 stood in a perfect line beneath the fading afternoon sun. Above them flew crimson banners embroidered with a crowned falcon. The steward lowered his head first. One by one, the older servants followed. Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. He knew that emblem now. It belonged to the sovereign household. No provincial governor could display it. No wealthy merchant could purchase it. Even the greatest dukes of the realm lowered their banners when those colors appeared. The king had sent this procession. But why? A royal captain dismounted from the lead column. Behind him came 20 guards, their ceremonial swords gleaming as they formed 2 silent rows from the courtyard steps to the nearest carriage. Seraphine moved closer to Alistair. The Dowager Duchess whispered that perhaps a royal messenger had come regarding Blackthorn's military contracts. Alistair wanted to believe her. Then the captain entered the hall. He did not bow to the Duke first. He looked past him, straight toward Elara. The room noticed. So did Seraphine. Alistair stepped forward and demanded to know what business had brought the crown to Blackthorn without notice. The captain removed his gloves slowly. His expression revealed nothing. He said the royal household had come to receive a member of the king's family. Silence swallowed the hall. Several nobles exchanged bewildered looks. The Dowager Duchess searched the crowd, as though some hidden prince might suddenly emerge from behind a pillar. Then Seraphine asked the question everyone was thinking. Who were they here for? The captain turned. Every royal guard in the courtyard followed his movement. And before Alistair could speak again, they lowered themselves to one knee. Not before him, before Elara. For the first time that day, the quiet woman everyone had mocked looked entirely unsurprised. The captain bowed his head. The Carriages, he announced, had come to take Lady Elara home. A gasp broke through the hall. But Alistair barely heard it, because the captain had said one thing that made no sense at all. The king had not sent for Elara as a disgraced duchess. He had sent for her as family. The truth did not arrive with a shout. It arrived in the captain's next words. Elara Vale was not the orphaned daughter of some forgotten country gentleman. She was Lady Elara Aurelia Vale, only surviving granddaughter of the late King Edric, daughter of Princess Helena Vale, and legal heir to the vast northern estates once held directly by the crown. The room seemed to contract around Alistair. For years, Elara's identity had been kept from public record after her mother's death. Political unrest had followed the old king's final days, and several powerful houses had fought over succession. To protect the child, Elara had been raised away from court under her father's surname, with only a handful of men knowing who she truly was. One of those men had been Alistair's father. The old duke had not arranged the marriage because Elara was helpless. He had arranged it because joining Blackthorn to Elara's bloodline would secure the duchy for a generation. Her inheritance included fertile northern lands, silver mines, river tolls, and royal protection over several disputed borders. More importantly, the marriage placed Blackthorn beneath the personal favor of the crown. For 3 years, Alistair had benefited from a connection he had never understood. Trade petitions had been approved, military contracts had been renewed, creditors had shown unusual patience. And when Blackthorn's debts had nearly crushed the estate during the second winter, the money that saved it had not come from luck. It had come from Elara. The steward finally lowered his head and admitted that every mysterious payment, every delayed debt, every quiet intervention had been made under her authority. A silence unlike any before settled over the hall. Alistair looked at the woman he had ordered out before sunset. For the first time, he saw the cost of what he had done. Elara had never entered Blackthorn dependent on him. Blackthorn had survived because of her. The Dowager Duchess sank slowly into her chair. Seraphine's expression changed completely. Only an hour earlier, she had mocked Elara for having nowhere to go. Now she understood that the woman she had helped disgrace owned estates larger than her father's entire marquisate. But the captain was not finished. By publicly stripping Elara of her title without investigation, Alistair had triggered consequences none of them had considered. The royal protection attached to Elara's marriage would end the moment she formally withdrew from Blackthorn. Several crown contracts would be reviewed. The northern trade privileges granted through her family would return to royal control, and the emergency credit shielding Blackthorn's oldest debts could legally be called in. Alistair's jaw tightened. Without those protections, the duchy would not collapse overnight, but it would bleed fast. The nobles who had laughed at Ilara minutes earlier began drifting away from Seraphine. Men who had ignored Ilara for years suddenly bowed. Women who had whispered behind fans lowered their eyes. The entire room was changing sides. Ilara noticed every movement, yet she showed no satisfaction. That made it worse. She did not need revenge. The truth itself was doing enough. Alistair finally asked the question he should have asked years earlier. Why had she never told him? Ilara looked at him for a long moment. Because his father had asked her to let Alistair choose what kind of husband he wished to become without knowing what her name could give him. She had honored that request, and Alistair had chosen. The words struck harder than anger ever could. Outside, the door of the first royal carriage opened. An elderly man in a white and gold court coat stepped down. The Chancellor of the realm. He had not come merely to escort Ilara home. He carried a royal decree, and before the sun set, the Duke of Blackthorn would learn exactly what losing his wife was going to cost him. The Chancellor entered Blackthorn Hall with 2 royal clerks behind him and a sealed document resting across both palms. No one spoke as he approached Ilara. The decree was simple, but its consequences were not. By order of the Crown, every privilege granted to Blackthorn through Ilara's bloodline would be suspended until the king determined whether the duchy had violated its obligations to a member of the royal family. The military contracts Alistair had fought years to secure would be reviewed. The northern toll exemptions would end at midnight, and the royal treasury would no longer guarantee the loans keeping Blackthorn's oldest estates from foreclosure. Alistair heard each sentence like a door closing, but the worst punishment was not financial. The Chancellor made clear that the king had given Ilara the choice. She could request a formal royal annulment that very evening. If she did, Blackthorn would lose every protection tied to the marriage permanently. The hall waited for her answer. Alistair did not ask her to save him. For once, pride abandoned him before words could. He looked toward the trunks beside the doors, then toward the ring she had left on the table, and finally toward the woman he had accused without even granting her the dignity of doubt. Only now did he understand how little he had known her. Ilara could have ruined him with one sentence. Instead, she asked for the brooch. Seraphine stiffened. A servant brought it forward. Ilara turned it over beneath the chandelier light and pointed to the clasp. The pin had been repaired recently with a rare blue solder used only by one jeweler in the capital. The Chancellor's clerk immediately recognized the maker's mark. Seraphine had visited that jeweler 3 days earlier. For the first time, fear replaced elegance on her face. The captain ordered her rooms searched. What they found ended the matter. Inside Seraphine's traveling case lay a receipt for the repair, a key copied from Ilara's writing desk, and a letter to her maid promising enough money to leave the kingdom once the Duchess had been disgraced. The maid broke first. She admitted everything. Seraphine had planted the brooch, expecting Alistair's distrust to do the rest, and it had. The Dowager Duchess covered her mouth in horror. Alistair looked at Seraphine, but there was no fury in him yet, only shame, because the trap had worked for one reason. He had wanted to believe the worst of his own wife. The guards removed Seraphine from the hall, while the nobles who had once crowded around her stepped aside as though they had never known her. Then Alistair faced Ilara. He did not kneel. He did not offer excuses. He admitted that no deception Seraphine committed could erase his own choice. He had humiliated Elara publicly, trusted gossip over 3 years of loyalty, and replaced her before proving she had done anything wrong. For the first time, Elara's composure cracked, not into tears, but into something quieter. She still loved him. That was what made leaving difficult. If she hated him, the decision would have been easy. The Chancellor asked whether she wished to sign the annulment. Elara looked at the waiting carriage, then at Alistair. She said she would return to the royal estate tonight, but she would not sign. Not yet. A murmur moved through the hall. This was not forgiveness. It was judgment delayed. If Alistair wanted their marriage, he would have to prove he wanted Elara herself, not her inheritance, her royal protection, or the wealth he had only just discovered. The crown would give him no shortcut, and Elara would offer him no absolution. And for the first time in their marriage, the choice was no longer his. Elara left Blackthorn that evening in the first royal carriage, not as the disgraced wife the court expected to see disappear, but as a woman finally returning to a name she had spent years hiding. The remaining 11 carriages followed behind her. For weeks, Alistair did not see her. The Crown suspended Blackthorn's privileges as promised, forcing him to confront how carelessly he had ruled. He sold 2 hunting estates, dismissed advisors who had encouraged his arrogance, reopened the tenant accounts Elara had managed in secret, and personally visited the villages she had helped without taking credit. He did not send flowers. He did not send jewels. He sent reports. Every month, Elara received an account of debts repaid, rents reduced, grain stores restored, and families protected. Not once did Alistair ask her to return. He had finally understood that repentance was not a speech, it was work. Seraphine was tried for fraud, theft, and conspiracy against a member of the royal family. Her father's influence spared her from prison, but not disgrace. She was stripped of court access and sent to a remote family estate, where the name she had tried to elevate became the source of her humiliation. The Dowager Duchess traveled to the royal estate and apologized to Elara without excuse. Elara accepted the apology, but she did not forget. 6 months after leaving Blackthorn, she returned to the castle. There were no cheering crowds waiting for her, no staged celebration. Only Alistair standing at the foot of the steps, holding the same Blackthorn signet she had placed on the table the day he cast her out. This time, he did not offer it as a symbol of possession. He offered it as a question. Elara had spent those months rebuilding her own life, taking her seat on the Northern Council and managing the estates that were hers by birth. She no longer needed Blackthorn to give her purpose. That was why her answer mattered. She took the ring, not because 12 royal carriages had proved her worth, not because Alistair had finally learned who her grandfather was, but because, after losing her, he had become the man his father once hoped he might be. The Crown restored Blackthorn's protections slowly, one privilege at a time, under Elara's supervision. Their marriage survived, but it did not return to what it had been. It became something better, a choice made freely by 2 people who finally understood what trust was worth. And years later, no one remembered the day a duke cast out a powerless wife. They remembered the day 12 royal carriages arrived and revealed she had never been powerless at all. If stories of hidden strength, royal secrets, betrayal, and second chances keep you watching, subscribe and join us for the next unforgettable story.